was certain that I checked my records and had not spoken in Ashland previously, but this somehow seems very familiar to me. But then I have spoken at many Chautauqua assemblies and labor picnics and watermelon festivals and anywhere I could find someone to listen over the years. And I'm here tonight in celebration of what we are calling the centennial of women's rights work in this country. I am here to tell the stories. They are important stories to tell. For many of you, just like me, were not alive when this movement began. Now, my name will not go down in the history books. They will not remember Carrie, Chapman, Catt. They will remember my predecessors. They will remember the name of Lucretia Mott. They will remember Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and they will remember Susan B. Anthony. And that is fine by me. I have never been a woman interested in fame. I have been a woman interested in action. Now, I, like many of you, never understood how terrible the conditions were for women at the beginning of the 17th century. Married women in particular. Their husbands owned all of their property. Their husbands had rights to their wages. Their husbands owned all of their wedding presents, including their engagement rings. Their husbands had sole rights to their children, and more than one story is told of a man who willed a child away. And if the woman did not please him by law, her husband had the right to punish her within reasonable limits. A woman could not speak in public. A woman could not even walk down the street unaccompanied by a man. I traveled this country and I heard many stories. The laws had been changing, but there were women who still could tell of the days. And here's one I find particularly interesting. There was a woman, she was a country school teacher, and she was paid $1 a week. Now, she would board around, meaning she would stay with the different families in the community week by week. And at the end of a year, she had saved $12. With that $12, she purchased a wedding present for herself, 12 solid silver spoons, each costing $1 apiece. Well, she married, and her husband and she lived in a small house her father had given her. It had a garden and a cow, and they were living well, but her young husband had not made a will. And when he took sick and died, the state swept in and gave her only 1/3 of their proceeds to their belongings, giving the other 2/3 to her husband's brother. She was told that she could have any of the household furnishings she wished, but that the cost would be deducted from her 1/3. She chose those 12 spoons and was charged $1 a spoon. Well, she set herself up in a sewing business and was doing quite well, and another man, a widower, asked for her to marry him, and she did. But he too had no will, and he was killed in an accident, and she went through the whole thing again, and again she saved those 12 spoons, paying $1 a spoon. By and by, a third man asked her to marry him. And she pursed her lips and said, "No. I have 12 silver spoons and I have purchased them 3 times. They cost me $12 to begin with, and I have paid $36, and I do not intend to purchase them again." It is a humorous story, and yet it speaks to the conditions women were living in. We call this the centennial because the first moment in our history was in 1840, when Lucretia Mott went as a delegate to London for an abolition convention. And she, along with Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who was there with her husband, also a delegate, were told they could not participate and must sit up in the rafters. And those two women vowed that when they returned to the United States, they would begin efforts for women's rights. And 8 years later, they did. In 1848, the first Women's Rights Convention was held in Seneca Falls, New York, and they drafted the Declaration of Sentiments, modeled after our own Declaration of Independence. They continued their work, and 3 years later, Elizabeth Cady Stanton met Susan B. Anthony, and it was the beginning of a 50-year partnership, working tirelessly for the rights of women. They didn't accomplish much, but by 1857, they had accomplished the Women's Property Bill, so that women could own property, and they could inherit property, and they could be sued and sued. Now, this was close to the beginning of the Civil War, and they tell me that few people realize how very close they were to finally getting full enfranchisement. But when the war began, all efforts went elsewhere.